Welcome to the Sealed Pages.
It's always a unique privilege to engage with Feroz Anka's work.
Yeah.
It exists at that rare intersection of meticulous structure and this profound, almost aching philosophical vulnerability.
It really does.
It feels less like reading a book and more like being invited into a carefully constructed interior space.
Absolutely. We've certainly spent time before delving into the intricacies of his previous endeavor, Lines of the Void. That was a deep and, well, often dizzying philosophical poetic journey. It took us through symbols, masks, time, nature, chaos.
And it was all built around that central, challenging question.
Right. Are we living in objective reality, or are we just living inside the maps we drew for ourselves? It was a huge macro-level inquiry.
And that macro-level questioning, I think, established the foundation for something intensely personal. If Lines of the Void was about questioning the external architecture of reality.
Then this new text, Paths to Myself, A Guide to Solitude, it just beautifully pivots. It turns that same demanding philosophical lens inward.
It's an inquiry into the architecture of the self.
Exactly. And before we map the terrain of this current monologue, let's just briefly revisit the author's unique foundation, Feroz Anka's background, because it's absolutely essential to understanding the structural coherence of this book.
You really is.
His background, from what we have, is remarkably dualistic. He initially trained in physics, then moved into computer science, software engineering, and then spent over a decade and a half leading these huge, large-scale digital transformation programs.
In really complex international environments.
Right.
And just think about that intellectual journey for a moment. You have this foundation rooted in analytical precision.
Systems design, defining key performance indicators, KPIs.
Constructing complex delivery roadmaps.
Yeah.
Navigating these intricate international structures. Solving problems that require pure, structured, logical thought.
Everything had to be quantifiable.
Trackable, efficient.
Yet this material details a necessary shift. Anka realized that the core human questions, the meaning of silence, the nature of identity, the feeling of belonging, they just couldn't be resolved or even adequately addressed by those technical frameworks alone.
The systems he was building professionally were completely incapable of managing the system that is the self.
And that tension, that's the engine of the book, isn't it?
And everything. Writing, therefore, emerges as this necessary bridge. It's the place where the structured, logical, analytical world of systems meets the messy, unstructured, intuitive world of the self.
He's seeking truth in both domains, using contemplative poetry and philosophy to illuminate what remains profoundly human beneath all that operational noise and logical efficiency of modern life.
Which brings us directly to the text in front of us.
It does. Paths to Myself is a poetic, philosophical monologue on these huge concepts: solitude, the inner voice, integrating shadows, the necessity of roots.
And ultimately, that necessary balance between being alone and belonging in an integrated way.
It's a beautifully positioned book. It's not offering quick fix solutions or, a 5-step plan.
No.
It's acting as a deeply insightful companion for readers who feel, inwardly displaced or just utterly lost in the din of other people's voices. It offers orientation.
And that's so much more valuable than a destination. That concept of orientation is crucial. It suggests you need a compass and a map, yes, but you also have to know where you're starting from. Our mission in this deep dive is precisely that, tracing the specific, often challenging inner journey that Anka maps out. The architectural process of self-discovery through radical silence, and exploring the profound emotional recognition it offers the sensitive, contemplative reader.
We're looking at this text as a structural guide to interiority. It shows us how that initial terrifying void of silence is, in fact, the necessary starting point for any meaningful internal construction.
So where do we begin?
Let's unpack this architecture, beginning at the very first breath. The opening of the book is just arresting. It immediately establishes the tension.
One day, I fell silent.
Exactly, and Anka immediately reframes silence. It's not a passive lack of sound. He frames it as a deliberate, proactive event, a disruptive calling. So the question is, what provokes this necessary collapse?
Well, he gives us 3 highly relatable, very modern causes. The first is an excess of voices, which, that resonates immediately, doesn't it, with the deluge of digital and social noise we all face every day.
Constantly. And the second is the emptiness of words, that realization that so much of the language we use is hollow. It serves surface functions, but it fails to express any deep truth.
But that third reason, for me, is the most compelling. the immense accumulated weight of everything piling up inside me that I could never quite bring myself to say.
That's it. That's the emotional and psychological overburdening of the system.
It's the sound of the self reaching its capacity. It redefines silence as an internal necessity, not some external choice. It's not that the world went quiet. It's that the self had to shut down the outward flow of noise because the internal pressure, all that unprocessed emotional data, the unsaid truths, it had become completely unsustainable.
It's a necessary collapse, a system failure, and this is where you can almost see his engineering mind at work. He recognized the system was failing and initiated an essential shutdown sequence. And this internal shutdown is triggered by a catalyst, this pivotal whisper that breaks the surface tension. Without all the voices, who are you?
That question is everything.
It instantly acts like a structural flaw, he notes. It cracks the former, assumed identity, and reveals an inner echo that is just shockingly unfamiliar, even alien.
And that recognition that the voice echoing back is foreign.
Yeah.
That is incredibly potent. It suggests the narrator had been operating under this borrowed or composite persona for so long that their authentic inner voice had just atrophied.
I silenced.
Exactly. Silenced not by others, but by the relentless noise of external performance. He writes that he had never really heard my own voice. That's a failure of internal communication.
So what follows this revelation?
Pure, immediate fear. Anka portrays silence as a mirror that forces you to stand naked.
All the protective layers, the distractions, the busy schedules, the conversational buffers, they're all stripped away.
And the terror isn't the void itself. It's the vulnerable, unmasked self that's revealed within that void.
The psychological impact is instantaneous. When you stop pushing outward, everything you've suppressed just rushes in.
He describes it as this internal chaos, as if all the conversations you had postponed for years, everything you had left unsaid, suddenly rose up at once.
Imagine that. Decades of suppressed truth demanding your attention all at the same time.
It's not quiet reflection. It's an internal riot.
It's the entire psychological backlog demanding to be processed right now. And for so many of us who are afraid of true solitude, the immediate reaction is panic. We fear the external loneliness, but the real terror, as Anka reveals, is that frightening stranger, the authentic self who lives inside the silence.
Exactly. When you surrender to that initial silence, the noise doesn't just magically disappear, it just shifts inward. It becomes this intense, inescapable self-interrogation.
The self starts asking the hard questions.
Where have you been? Why did you allow yourself to be hijacked by external expectations for so long? This internal chaos is the necessary price of admission to the self. It's a truth the text demands that you, the reader, confront.
And as the narrator processes this, the function of silence begins to transition. It goes from being a void, a passive absence, to a structured space.
Oh, well, that must be actively dug.
Yes, which implies immense effort, not passive retreat. He is actively constructing an inner domain.
And this really highlights that fierce resistance to change. Anka notes the fear of letting go of the comforting yet ultimately destructive accustomed self. We cling to what's familiar, don't we?
Always. The old habits, the established ways of speaking and relating.
Even when we know they harm our core integrity. That clinging is the system fighting the necessary reboot.
So what's the breakthrough moment? The structural pivot of this section is surprisingly simple.
It's not some grand philosophical realization.
No. The internal struggle ends with a moment of pure surrender. The narrator gives one single simple word to the silence. All right.
And that single word is the decision to cease resistance. It marks the passage across the threshold. It's the choice to stop fighting and to start listening.
And critically, once that surrender happens, the external calling of silence stops.
Because the narrator has finally started listening to the sound of the self. The conversation is now on the terms of truth, and this establishes the central challenge. Courage is required just to stand still and hear your inner voice.
It's the difference between hearing and heeding. And heeding that call means you have to look at the external structures we all build to avoid it in the first place. So, if silence is the initial entry point, Anka immediately shows us what we're entering away from. That's chapter 1, the echo of crowds. He systematically dissects the dynamic of social interaction before the silence took hold. The crowd, in his view, is exposed as the primary source of our external validation.
We exist by constantly absorbing and repeating other people's voices.
Right. Often believing our own voice is inherently incomplete without that external affirmation.
This is such a critical analysis for the modern reader. I mean, especially anyone navigating performance culture and social media, We're constantly seeking confirmation of our worth through likes, attention, or just being seen doing things.
Anka describes this process of getting lost as leaving a piece of myself behind in every single interaction.
A fleeting glance, a performative word, a shared but totally hollow burst of laughter.
It's an ongoing subtle self-erosion. Our identity gets outsourced.
And the devastating reality he confronts is the realization that these crowds were nothing but an echo. People were speaking and interacting, but no one was really saying anything.
And critically, no one sees. You become an invisible thread in a maze, just following signals that lead nowhere authentic.
This realization then triggers this profound psychological analysis of the mask. The narrator discusses having literally hundreds of masks.
Worn to satisfy specific transactional expectations.
To be a good person.
To look strong when you're internally broken.
Or simply to be there for others when you're not even there for yourself.
The text highlights a paradox here that speaks volumes about self-protection. The masks are worn because they provide this paradoxical sense of safety. They protect us from the judgment of the world.
But in providing that safety, they are simultaneously and systematically erasing the core authentic self.
We trade authenticity for acceptance.
Every time. And Anka points out that being among crowds makes you think you feel more real.
Yeah.
Because you're getting external feedback that you exist.
Uh-huh.
But it's always an illusion because every gaze reshapes you into something else.
You're constantly adjusting the mask based on the light source. And this reshaping is the betrayal of the self. The removal process, though, is handled with beautiful detail in the book. It's not a violent ripping off. It's a gradual narrative unwrapping.
The masks themselves speak. They tell the story of their own creation, their own necessity.
Which allows you, the reader, to recognize your own defenses.
Yes. You hear the mask designed for self-sacrifice whisper. You put me on so that people would love you.
And the mask of competence says, I protected you because you were afraid of the world.
They're relics of fear, misidentified as tools for survival.
It's a structural insight, really. The system of the self installed these protective firewalls, the masks, that eventually compromised the core operating system.
And the ultimate conflict is that deep existential fear of non-existence when the social scaffolding is removed.
The narrator panics. What if no one heard my voice? Could I exist on my own?
That is the primal fear that keeps us perpetually busy and surrounded.
And here, Anka clarifies the essential distinction that is so vital for this book's whole thesis.
Crowds provide an illusion of reality.
Exactly. Stepping out requires the courage to embrace that initial vague emptiness of loneliness. And loneliness in this context is framed not as isolation or failure,
but as a necessary self-imposed break from the addictive reliance on other people's approval.
That is a fundamental reframe. Loneliness is the waiting room. Solitude is the office where the work actually happens.
Loneliness is the perceived lack of others.
Whereas solitude is the deliberate presence of the self.
You stop trying to be seen by the external crowd, and you start focusing entirely on that hidden voice inside. And this shift is the preparation for the most harrowing stage of all.
The confrontation within the depths of silence. This recognition of the false nature of the crowd prepares the narrator for the second structural movement, Chapter 2, the internal descent.
Right. If Part 1 was a decision to enter the quiet space.
Part 2 is about the consequences of that descent. Chapter 2 deepens the relationship with silence. It graduates from being a passive mirror to becoming an active, demanding interrogation.
The questions are so heavy and unavoidable. Where have you been all this time, and when did you lose yourself?
Silence now ruthlessly demands the naked truth. It instantly rejects any attempt to use empty words or philosophical defenses.
The intensity here feels almost physical. The narrator realizes immediately that running is pointless, not just because the silence is everywhere,
but because it was inside.
It's a confrontation you cannot escape, because the interrogator is you. The silence accepts only one currency, absolute honesty. And the narrator admits he was utterly unprepared for the level of truth that was required.
This section introduces what is maybe the most vivid and essential metaphor of the entire book.
Silence as an ocean.
Yes. The narrator doesn't just dip a toe in, they dive deep. And the deeper they plunge, the less they can breathe, leading to this point of profound, overwhelming suffocation.
It's the existential weight of a suppressed existence and all that neglected truth.
And this imagery of drowning is so central to the psychological experience Anka maps out.
It signifies the point of ego death, doesn't it? The collapse of the constructed persona.
He notes the profound paradox. Drowning was not an ending, it was a beginning. This isn't literal death.
No, it's the necessary moment of catharsis, where the old self, that system designed by external metrics, is allowed to fail completely.
And what specifically happens in those depths?
Everything suppressed just spills out. It's an uncontrolled deluge. Every fear, every regret, every hidden word.
It's the system dumping all its unprocessed, corrupted data at the same time.
It's the psychological mechanism of catharsis. You have to let the pain surface before you can properly breathe in the new space.
And the confrontation at the bottom of the ocean is the self observing its own reflection, which is unfamiliar and torn into pieces.
And that fragmentation isn't random. It's directly attributed to the years of avoidance, the rejected thoughts, the suppressed feelings. The self is fractured because it spent so much effort trying to isolate the good parts and bury the bad.
This is where Anka provides a critical psychological insight. The narrator is forced to acknowledge the fragmented self, and the voice of that torn reflection whispers the key to recovery.
Accept me, because I am a part of you.
That is the turning point for internal wholeness.
It means recognizing that the dark sides, the confusing contradictions, the mistakes, the regrets, they're not external burdens. They are integral components of you.
Wholeness isn't achieved by eliminating imperfection.
It's achieved by embracing it entirely, including all the parts you wished weren't there. And this acceptance allows the narrator to finally take a breath in that depth.
The breath is the restoration of the core system. Once acceptance is granted, once the narrator stops fighting the internal chaos, the function of silence shifts again.
It's no longer just a mirror reflecting the broken state.
It becomes a profound teacher. It shows who the self was and actively teaches who the self could become.
It facilitates a total rebirth, structurally changing the individual from a fixed being, an artifact defined by past events and external judgments, into a continuous process.
You can see Anka's engineering roots here again. The self isn't a static legacy system. It has to be treated as a continuously evolving process, requiring constant, truthful internal feedback.
So the ultimate takeaway of this intense chapter is that the drowning was the curriculum. It taught the narrator how to breathe again, not through external air,
But through internal truth. True unburdened existence is only possible after facing and accepting the entire symphony of noise and chaos that lives within the silence.
The experience transforms the individual from an object of external definition into the author of a continuous self-created action.
And having successfully navigated those depths, the focus shifts outward again. This intense internal cleansing sets the stage for Chapter 3.
We move from the suffocating ocean depths to the liberating road ahead.
Walking now becomes the dominant and most important metaphor, and the core philosophical realization transforms the entire quest. The narrator declares, walking this path was less about finding myself and more about creating myself. This is a monumental shift.
It really is. The self is not a hidden treasure waiting to be uncovered. It's an ongoing, active construction project.
This redefinition is vital because it moves away from that romanticized idea of self-discovery and toward the rigorous commitment of intentional existence.
But when you choose creation, you choose constant action. And that active creation is immediately juxtaposed with the emotional pain of departure. You have to acknowledge that the self you thought you were following needs to be left behind.
And Anka gives us that painful confrontation. The ghost of the former self appears, that identity built on external approval, and asks the devastating question that just stops you in your tracks.
For all this time, who did you live to please?
Oof. And the text confirms that every former step was taken not for myself but for others, following borrowed maps, borrowed footsteps, established societal roadmaps.
The power of that question lies in its application to our own lives, doesn't it? Most of our early decisions, career, location, social circles, are so heavily influenced by pleasing others or seeking external status.
Walking your own path is inherently lonely, precisely because it means breaking away from that inherited safety structure. You are now the sole architect.
And that burden is the acceptance of full responsibility. The road ahead has no guarantees. The success will be uniquely yours, yes.
But crucially, the failure would be mine.
That is the unavoidable loneliness of the authentic choice, the weight of self-authorship. There's no one else to blame for missteps, and that, paradoxically, is the source of tremendous freedom.
Anka reframes error beautifully here. He reinforces the idea that getting lost can set you free.
And this is not an instruction to wander aimlessly. It's the realization that whenever the narrator takes a path that's not dictated by external expectation, even if they end up physically lost, They discover something new about their own capacity, their resilience, their true desires.
The process of losing the excess, the borrowed identities, the fears, is a constant form of necessary cleansing. The loss of direction forces an internal calibration.
So getting lost isn't a mistake in direction.
No, it's a necessary step in the process of defining the destination. The road isn't leading to a predefined result handed down by others. The road itself is the result of an intentional life.
And this culminates in that transformative realization that the road isn't static or externally mapped out. It is actively, consciously created with every movement.
The road was under my feet.
That awareness transforms physical movement into a conscious, intentional act of existence. Every step is a deliberate choice, an act of rebellion against the passive acceptance of a pre-written destiny.
The metaphor of the footsteps is so powerful in this context. Each step leaves a trace that is uniquely yours, and that becomes the record of your authentic story.
It signifies that even in silence, there is movement, and that movement is the self defining its path forward.
This commitment to self-creation ensures the journey is unending by definition. Every new step was a new beginning. As the narrator establishes their independence and begins authoring their own reality, they inevitably encounter the neglected residue of the past.
The inner baggage that was too heavy to carry on the new path.
Which leads us directly to the confrontation with the self's hidden inventory.
Chapter 4 introduces the shadows. And Anka makes a point of demystifying them right away. They're not abstract evils or, philosophical darkness.
No, they're concrete internal residue. Fears, regrets, mistakes, rejected desires.
They're always behind you, trailing your light. They are the contents of that suppressed data dump we talked about earlier.
And the narrator's initial reaction is the common one, the instinctual one.
To run. To try and outpace the darkness.
But this strategy is doomed to failure. Anka observes the ironic psychological effect. Running only makes the shadows grow larger because whenever the light hit, the shadows stretched.
That visual of the stretching shadow is a perfect metaphor for psychological projection and suppression. If you try to forget those parts of yourself, the mistakes you made, the desires you were told were unacceptable, they don't just disappear.
They gain power.
They follow you invisibly and they get heavier. The only viable path to self-liberation is to turn around and face them, which demands immense courage.
The profound insight is gained through this necessary confrontation. The shadows are not enemies. They're forgotten pieces, often serving as forgotten protection or essential guidance.
They are there to make you whole.
This leads to a rich dialogue where the narrator grants the shadows a voice and receives specific, necessary lessons from them.
And this is where the wisdom of the text just crystallizes. The mistakes shadow acts as this relentless but crucial mentor. It teaches, without your mistakes, you cannot learn.
It reminds the narrator that errors are the cost of expertise. They're the essential data points for any successful system.
Then the fears shadow, which is often the most intimidating one, whispers, without your fears, you cannot have courage.
Fear is not the absence of safety, but the measure of what you value. It teaches caution, respect for boundaries. Without acknowledging fear, courage is just recklessness.
And the suppressed desire shadow warns that if these raw, essential needs are ignored or rejected, they become a heavier burden than if they were simply acknowledged and integrated.
The shadows serve as critical internal reminders of balance. They remind the self that efficiency without wholeness is completely unsustainable.
The emotional arc of this section traces that movement from avoidance and fear to the ultimate vulnerability. The narrator asks the shadows,
"Can you love me?"
And that question signifies the moment of absolute, complete acceptance, realizing that the shadows are not a lack or a failure, but a part of my being, essential for dimensionality.
The act of embracing the shadows is the final hurdle for achieving internal completeness. They transform from a psychological burden into trustworthy internal guides.
Because they teach you your limits, your vulnerabilities, your necessities.
The culminating wisdom is crystal clear. You cannot find your own light without accepting your own shadows. They are inseparable parts of a functional, complete self. Light only gains meaning where shadow exists. Having achieved internal wholeness by integrating the shadows and actively defining the path forward, the monologue then shifts in Chapter 5 to the necessary synthesis.
Yes. The journey moves from absolute, isolated solitude to integrated, meaningful belonging.
And this transition is so crucial because it prevents the self-discovery process from devolving into some kind of narcissistic isolation. The narrator has to return to the world.
Anka uses the evocative forest analogy, roots, branches, shared soil, to understand profound, healthy interdependence. The realization is that because the self is now whole and secure, even loneliness is transformed into a kind of togetherness.
That is profound. Loneliness, which was previously a void, is now an established foundation that travels with you. The central metaphor here becomes the roots.
Roots are the silent, hidden foundation, the deep internal stability, what keeps you standing.
They're the anchor points of the self's architecture.
And by stopping and consciously feeling one's own roots, meditating on your internal stability, your personal history, the narrator learns to connect to the external world without losing freedom.
Because the roots are free in their own soil. This is the practical definition of authentic belonging.
What does free in their own soil mean in a real-world application for you, the listener? It means grounded self-sufficiency. You stand firm.
The presence of other people's roots, their needs, their voices, their paths, it no longer feels like interference or competition.
No, it becomes a quiet communication. You interact from a position of internal fullness, not external need.
Solitude, the narrator notes, taught the voice how to speak.
But harmony, the experience of integrated belonging, gives that voice meaning. True harmony requires standing strong in your own discovered voice, allowing it to become a song that balances with others.
Rather than reverting to an echo that's just seeking approval. It's the difference between blending in and contributing.
And this leads to the central, elegant philosophical balance that really summarizes the entire work. Solitude within togetherness, togetherness within solitude.
That concept of balanced presence is the true freedom the individual is seeking. It's the peace that comes from knowing you can be alone and complete while still being meaningfully and functionally connected to the world.
And the structural teaching of this section is the realization that whoever stands firm in their own roots can create a forest with other roots.
The forest is the perfect example of coexistence, where individuality strengthens the collective whole. The trees share resources, water, light, soil, without compromising their singular vertical nature.
The journey has moved from being drowned out by others to finding the self in silence to returning to the world with an established, authentic, and rooted voice.
Anka provides a necessary final chapter, Endless Journey. This ensures the reader understands that arriving at the end of the text is decidedly not arriving at the final, finished version of the self.
Right.
The journey is continuous. It's marked by constant cycles of structural dismantling, loss, and creation.
This is a vital philosophical conclusion. It prevents the book from being treated like some fixed self-help checklist. Anka is explicit about this. The moment you think you have found yourself, a new door opens.
It reinforces the identity of the self as a perpetual process, not a static state.
The work is never truly done. You're always getting lost again, and with every subsequent losing, you find yourself anew, but this time equipped with deeper roots.
The essential questions posed throughout the book: who are you? Can you speak with your own voice? They will always resurface.
Because they're the mechanism of life itself. The continuous search for self is the only constant path of creation.
And this philosophical conclusion is stated with beautiful simplicity. The road has no end, because the road itself is life.
The meaning lies not in reaching a specific milestone, but in remaining in that constant search, recreating the self with every conscious, intentional step. Existence is defined by being on the road.
We should take a moment, just as the text suggests, to appreciate the atmosphere conveyed by the cover image. The winding moonlit path immediately suggests that the inward journey is often taken during quiet, reflective times when the world sleeps and personal searching can finally begin.
And the muted, almost hazy night landscape evokes that gentle solitude. It's not a stark, intimidating isolation. It's a soft, contemplative space where you feel both protected and free to explore.
While the luminous moon provides guidance without providing explicit instruction, it illuminates the way forward just enough to take the next conscious step.
Suggesting that the light comes from a higher source of intuition, but the actual steps must always be taken from within the self.
Connecting this back to his previous work, Lines of the Void question external reality, the symbols, time, the structural maps of the world we inherit.
And Paths to Myself moves that skepticism inward. It questions the fundamental structure of the self and the origin of its own voice. It's a progression from questioning what is real outside to questioning who is real inside.
This text is a gift for the contemplative reader, for anyone philosophically curious, spiritually restless, or maybe just traversing a moment of profound personal transition.
It addresses the fundamental discomfort of feeling inwardly displaced in an age that's defined by external noise and performative identity.
Anka's work is not meant for rapid consumption.
Absolutely not. The text itself serves as an invitation to a process. We'd strongly suggest approaching this book slowly, maybe at night, or during deep morning quiet.
And ideally with a notebook, to engage truthfully with the questions it poses.
It is a highly recommended companion for times of burnout or system collapse, or just when the external world feels loudest and you're desperate to hear your own faint, true voice again.
It serves as a powerful reminder that knowledge of the self isn't passively found. It's intentionally created with every courageous, truthful step away from the crowd.
And as we conclude our deep dive into this elegant work, we're left with the core invitation inherent in the text. If every step forward is necessarily also an act of leaving a piece of your past self behind, the masks, the borrowed voices, the old fears, what piece of yourself are you prepared to lose today to become something genuinely new tomorrow?
A profound question that demands silence for an answer. We hope this exploration of Anka's path provides you with the structural framework and perhaps the courage necessary to seek out your own.